Okay, so today I've been asked a question to do with trees and storms. So if we look at that in terms of pre-storm damage or pre-storm, and then we look at that as being after storm, then we can break it down into smaller bits. One of the things that I often ask with trees is with people, and because people are scared of storms and scared of the trees falling over, and we see the sensational news reports of a tree falling over, when you look at it in hindsight, that one tree fell over, and that's a pity of whatever it landed on, and I'm sorry for that. I'm not making light of that, but what I'm saying is, in the scheme of things, if there's 1 million trees out there and one fell over, it doesn't mean that all trees are going to fall over. But there certainly are things we can do to help mitigate or help reduce that risk of your tree falling over, or your tree collapsing, or your tree having problems in strong winds. The other thing that's also important to do is to understand how trees work in winds. So, what makes a strong wind? What makes a storm? What makes the tree behave differently than it would normally? So, if we have a look at that as well, then we can work out what we're actually going to do. So, one of the most important things to prevent your tree from being affected by a storm is to look at it. So, if you look at your tree and you realize it's half dead, or you realise it's got no leaves on it when it should have leaves, or it's got ooze coming out of the side of it, and that's called kino. So if you're looking at things like that and sort of say, that doesn't look like a normal tree to me, that may be something I might need to have a look at. So, but I don't know what I'm seeing. So that's where a tree surgeon comes in. So what I like to do is to go out and have a look at the tree, discuss the options that people have got, try and attempt to diagnose what the problem is, but also attempt to let them know what the long-term prognosis is likely to be. The parts of the tree that tend to collapse in the storm are naturally the weakest parts first. So the bits that tend to be dead, that are close to falling off anyway, or the bits that are malshapened or malformed, or have got disease at the junction. So, for example, if you've got borers at the junction, or you've got phalinus in a fork of a tree. Phalinus is a fungus that will eat the middle of the tree. So if you eat the tree, if you have a look at something like that and you see the fruiting of phalinus, then you know that that's potentially a weak spot in that particular part of the tree, which could cause that tree to collapse or cause that tree to break at that point. So importantly, a tree that is likely to survive in a storm has got to be healthy. So look at the health of the tree. If you're not sure, ask a tree surgeon. Secondly, what is a storm? A storm is primarily winds over and above what we would normally expect. So anything that's storm affected means that the gusts of wind are higher than what the tree is been used to, or as a result of change in that tree's environment. So suddenly it's now had more wind loading put on it than it had before. So just recently in the winds that we had here, and I'll give you two examples. We had a tree in Lawson that I saw had fallen over. I saw several bits and pieces in Lawson, but this one was particularly interesting because the tree itself would not normally be something I would expect to fall over, because it looked very healthy. It looked the trunk was good, the branches were good, the form was good, so the health was good. But when I had a look at the root system, you could see that that water had caused the tree to actually had damaged roots, and it caused the soil around the tree base to be anoxic, which means it sort of lacks oxygen and becomes smelly and black and smelly, which can then lead to phytophthora, which is a root disease, and you'll see that because you actually see some of the root bark turns black and will slough off. You can deglove it quite easily. And it's the smell of rotting. It's a bit like rotting compost bin that hasn't been aerated or turned, or too much lawn clippings have been put into it, and it gets stinky. So the interesting thing there was it wasn't the tree, it wasn't the soil, it wasn't the ground. It was basically because of the water diversion coming off from another area that had caused this tree to actually now be sitting in a puddle. So most trees like water, as humans like water to have a drink, but nobody wants to have it over their heads. The same thing with trees. They're not ducks. They don't like sitting in water. They like having water going past them, but not necessarily sitting in it. Some trees can cope with that quite well. Swamp cypress can cope with it quite well. You look at something like a mangrove, is what I was thinking, is something that can actually handle salt water. It's even harder. But certain adaptations allow trees to do that. Generally, most trees don't have those sort of adaptations that live in the mountains. So The other example was when I saw a tree in Springwood and a large gum tree, and people say, "Oh, trees are gum trees are widow makers, mate. They're all going to kill you. They're all going to kill you." But the interesting thing about this was 6 weeks prior to that, to this tree falling over, they had a driveway renovation done, and the actual roots around the tree, about 1.5 meters away, had been cut, torn off, basically by machinery digging the driveway out, the old driveway out, putting the new driveway in. And wondered why the tree fell over, because all its roots have been cut on one side. If the tree hadn't fallen over in the wind, it would have probably died anyway, because the roots have been cut quite extensively on one side. In actual fact, two sides, up one side and across the top. So it's really in a difficult way. So human interactions are often the reasons why trees fail in the first place during storms. The other thing is that people often say to me, "How do I make my tree safe?" And I'll say to people, look, if you can plant another tree next to it, and another tree next to that, and another tree next to that one, if trees are working in groves, if there's groups of trees, there tends to be this sort of unionist mentality, and that we all work together and we all form this committee to protect ourselves. So the trees on the outside tend to go a bit thicker in that direction, away from the centre, and they will end up being the guardians or the sentinels for the group, and the group in the middle will tend to sort of be the support that the whole group doesn't collapse, fall over. Often you'll find that the trees that have been damaged by storm are ones that have been in isolation, and they could be recently in isolation. So another tree next to you on the neighbour's side has been removed, or something further down has changed, and then the tree is unable to cope with sudden change. I generally find that it takes 2 years for a tree to be able to adapt to a new environmental conditions. So something like removing a tree on one side of a tree and then expecting the rest of the tree to cope can be quite difficult. Often I say to people, if that tree needs to come down or whatever, can we reduce it in stages? Can we do half the tree now and half the tree next year? Or can we do something that's going to minimise the impact on other trees in the garden? Okay, so after a storm, so if a storm has now come through, the winds have exceeded what the tree has been able to deal with, and so you have a branch come down, you have the tree's fallen over. So then you sort of look at a tree down. You could type that into Google and see what sort of assistance you can get after that. SES are very good at helping you to solve immediate problems if it's across a driveway or across a roof. Naturally, if it's an emergency, you would call the fire brigade or you would call the police. But once all the dust is settled and it's been assessed to sort of say, okay, this is what we need to do, generally the insurance company is called if it's landed on property. Again, making sure that life is safe and then property is safe, and then we can work out what we're going to do. So what we would do is, if the tree is still standing but it's got broken arms, as a tree surgeon we can go and make that assessment as to sort of say how well the tree will survive if we were to take that arm off or try and do reparative work. You don't need council permission to do reparative work on a storm damaged tree, provided that's all you're doing. You're not sort of cutting it in half and saying, I did repair work. No, you're just repairing the part that's broken, and any other bits that broke as a result of that. It may then become a determination that we sort of say, look, the tree is no longer viable, or it's no longer safe, or it's no longer a good example of this tree as a result of what's happened. That in that case, there again, if it's a make safe situation, you don't need council approval, but you do need to be able to make sure that you've documented what you've done and let council be aware of what's happened. So it means you can proceed straight away. If it's not a make safe issue, then I advise the owners to get council approval, and then we can see what needs to be done as a result of that. Generally, it's a matter of assessing the tree, and then seeing how that tree, what's left of the tree, to be able to actually make a determination.